welcome and thank you, Matthew Collings. Matthew Collings is an iconic British art critic, writer, broadcaster, and artist. Matthew penned the YBA chronicle Blimey in 1997, which I read when I was studying, actually, and has written and presented multiple documentaries and TV series, including This is Modern Art and This is Civilisation. Matthew is also a successful artist, both in his own right and as one half of the duo Biggs and Collings. So, Matthew, when and how did you first discover art? Was there a moment that switched?
Well, I was always able to make art as a child. And in my mind now, I suppose, and pretty early on in my life, I realized that art was really two things. One was the making of it, and the other was a sort of art culture. And the latter really involves knowledge of art history, all the institutions of art, the galleries of art schools, the literature of art, art magazines, art books, that kind of thing. So I didn't really discover art, I just could always do it. But I discovered this thing, the art world, when I went to art school when I was 19.
Well, that was much later on. Well, your early life, how was that? Where were you born and brought up?
I was born in South Kensington in St Mary Abbots Hospital in 1955. There was just my mum, Rosalind Collings, because my father had committed suicide in July. I was born in September, and my mother brought me up until I was 6. She had a sort of mental illness that meant she had very, very spectacular nervous breakdowns, the first of which occurred when I was 6. She was pretty wobbly in those first 6 years. We lived in a series of very poverty-stricken single rooms in different poor parts of London. When I was 6, she had a big breakdown when she was 31, and she had electric shock treatment. I never really was mothered by her again from that point. I went to children's home. I was there for about 7.5 years. And when I came out, I lived with her briefly, but that didn't come to anything because she immediately had another breakdown. But
do you have a memory of your life with your mother before you were 6?
Vivid, very vivid.
Really?
Yeah, it was very. Well, in some ways, it was. I guess it was normal in the sense that I normalized it, like a child would think, well, this is normal, but actually, it was a horror story by any objective account, because my mother had a very loose grip on reality, and sort of easily, well, not easily, but frequently, her consciousness was completely dominated by fantastic illusions and fears. You know, whatever was in the air in those days would become reality. There's a lot of funny noises coming through. But anyway, so in those days, it was like ban the bomb. So she thought that a nuclear bomb was going to go off any moment. You know, would she save herself or would she save me? And this became a very obsessive preoccupation with her. And I remember my dreams at the time were very dominated by fireballs and explosions and darkness with fire coming up the road. You know, I'd be tugging at my mother, trying to say, there's a bomb coming. Well, not a bomb, or the moon was going to crash on the earth or something. But also I remember normal things, like, you know, I went to infant school. I had a little friend who was the son of a friend of my mother's. You know, I remember my mother making food and, you know, various sort of fairly stable things, which I suppose must be idealized concentrations of different memories, you know.
Did you take on those concerns then, Matt?
Well, when she had that first breakdown, I think I was mad too. You know, a little child who's a single child with a single parent is in a symbiotic relationship with the mother. And I remember very strongly at that time driving around in this little toy car I had. We lived in Camberwell, and I was driving around the streets all covered in paint. I like painted my face and everything. And I was singing at the top of my lungs, and I was completely fearless about the traffic. You know, like the lorries were going by, and I would say that I was manic then, but of course I don't remember being manic. I have to sort of deduce from my images and from the things that I remember. So I didn't know what a bomb was really, or a nuclear war, but I did have a very strong sense of apocalypse and things crashing and falling in, because they really were falling in, you know, as far as my reality was concerned. It was many months, that the lead up to my mother's breakdown, if anyone's had an experience of mania, it's a long period where things go very, very crazy. You know, we lived in one little room and everything was disintegrating, and meaning was disintegrating, but the objects around us were disintegrating, collapsing. There was no order. It was all chaos, you know.
Did you find more? Did you find order? I mean, you left. You separated from your mother, didn't you, and went into a home. Did you find order there?
A very rigid, loveless, grim, and violent order I found there. We were in. I was in a children's home with 7 children. And there was one house mother, then replaced by another after a couple of years. But there was never any love from the mother, from the house mother, so-called house mother. And there was no real attention to the children as children. They were units who had to get up in the morning, do a load of chores, go to school, come back in the evening, do a load of more chores, and then go to bed. And they could do any kind of sadistic behavior to each other and nothing would happen. You know, none of us would ever tell the house mother because we didn't feel that she was our mother or anything. And we didn't feel that she had any responsibility to us. So anyone big and strong dominated anyone small and weak. And when I first arrived there, I was small and weak. And I was, you know, abused like year after year. The first few years I was there, any moment of the day, I could be beaten up. Either like hurt a bit or really badly hurt and terrorized and emotionally freaked out all the time.
Did you use drawing as a therapeutic device during this period?
Well, I thought of myself as a very good drawer because nobody else could draw in the home. And at the school, no one else could really draw with quite the confidence that I could, although some people probably were actually more talented than me and I had a sort of a rhythmic, graphic, linear talent where you could see straight away that there was something impressive there. And as a child, you read, "Hey, Em, can you be quiet?" There's a sort of great big noise coming in the door. I've often thought about it actually. How was I really talented, or did I think that I was? You know, but I certainly did a lot of drawing, and being able to do art made me be able to construct a sort of world in which I was a kind of not only all right, but kind of super. You know, as I transcended all the problems of the children's home.
Matt, how is my heart goes out to that little boy, you know.
Thank you. Me too.
How do you feel? How do you, the adult, how do you feel about him now? You know, you must feel so protective and
well, it's a story
bad for him.
I don't know really what I feel. Don't know how to answer that really.
No,
it's a story as much as anything else that I've told many times. You know, I've had therapy for more than 20 years of my life, very intense. You know, 3 times a week for 20 years. And again, people who've had experience of mania and people who've had experience of therapy will know that after a couple of years, telling that story gets pretty old, you know, and you realize that it doesn't give you a license to do anything, you know. You kind of think when you're older, well, I had a bad beginning, so people should forgive me. And it's kind of quite a hard lesson. You've got to realize that actually that isn't so. It doesn't work like that. And really the past is only a sort of, your memory of the past is one tool amongst other tools that you could use in order to function in the present. So I honestly, it's probably the one question that you'll ask me that I really don't know the answer to. I just don't know how I feel about that little boy.
Yeah, of course.
In amongst this, Matt, was there creativity within the family, either with your father, who I realise you didn't get to meet, but your father or your mother?
Well, I was kind of born into an art context, in that my mother was at art school in those earlier. She was at Camberwell Art School when she had a breakdown, and she had met my father after he broke up with the sculptor Liz Frink, and they were all on a sort of bohemian art scene in Chelsea and Fulham Road. So my mother knew a lot of the artists that later I came to know the names of, but because my mother was increasingly a survivor of mental illness, she had less and less to do with the art world as such. She had her memories of being young and being at art school, but she no longer had much to do with art because she was holding herself together all the time. But you know, those little rooms we lived in, they were always full of art materials, and my mother's sketches from Camberwell, and she was doing a textile course, so there was lino cuts and fabrics and printed fabrics and stuff. So I had art around me. In the children's home, there was no art, nothing like that. You know, my mother provided a sort of art culture in a way. I associated her with art culture, but the children's home didn't know anything like that. And at the junior school I went to, and then I went to grammar school for a little bit when I was still at the children's home, I was introduced, I guess, to a sort of more formal art making, maybe, which I grasped as far as I could. You know, I was used to drawing like comics. So I didn't really think, when people told me about art as such, in quotes, I didn't think I had anything to do with that because it was far too ambiguous. You know, work of art by Renoir doesn't really look like anything unless you've been somehow initiated into appreciation of art. The kind of art I did was kind of power art. You know, I could draw something that looked like something and other people couldn't. So I wasn't going to start doing things that looked smudgy or abstract, or you couldn't tell what it was, you know, if you see what I mean. So
You
I
drew
guess
to impress.
I drew to impress, really,
Yeah,
yeah, to impress myself and to impress others, and
yeah.
for fun, you know. But I it never occurred to me until much later in my life that I could use it somehow. I could use it as a way of being in the world, and that's when I decided to go to art school.
Mm.
What sort of age did you start thinking about that? I mean, when did you consider that art could be a career?
Well, a later phase of my life than the children's home was a therapeutic community in Kent that I was in for a few years as a young teenager from 15 to about 17 and a half. And, you know, sometimes people would visit this place and they'd say, oh, you know, he's very talented, he should go to art school. So I thought, well, they said, you're talented, that's great. You know, I love to be told that. And so then maybe I should go to art school, whatever it is. And so I guess from about the age of 15, I heard about art school. When I was 17, I came out of that community and I went to live in London. I looked after myself for a couple of years, and I was doing labouring jobs and, you know, working in supermarkets and working on building sites. So a combination of knowing that there was a thing called art school and that anyone could go, because in those days you didn't need any money to go. Your parents didn't have to pay for you or anything. You got a grant. A combination of those two things, and then the pressure of, you know, I couldn't bear really working on building sites. It was really boring. Also, I was able to sell a few paintings. I was selling paintings for £15 then, sort of hippie paintings. They weren't really hippie. They were kind of a bit like Chagall. You know, vaguely knew about Paul Klee and the charming side of early modernism. And I combined some of that look. And by now, probably softened a bit towards Impressionism. I'd seen a Thames and Hudson introduction to Impressionism. So I was doing things that I could make people like, you know, and so a combination of all those factors made me apply to go to art school, and I easily got in. I didn't have any O levels or anything, so I'd never really been to school beyond about 12 and a half, 13 or so. And I got into art school, and immediately from day one, I found this is a whole different thing. You know, for the minute I stepped in that door, I was in the art world, and I was in
And
this thing.
which art school was this, Matt? And at what time?
I
What
went
year?
to the I'm sure
Yeah.
School of Painting and Drawing, which now no longer exists because it's been
No.
assimilated in St Martin's. It had been a private art school, and in fact, my mother went there for a year in 1945 when she was 15, when it was private. But I went there when it had become a school that you could go to on a grant, And so some people paid fees, but most people got grants. So it's like any other London art school, really.
And this is sort of mid-70s.
1974.
Yeah.
I was 19. Um, it was mainly life drawing and life painting, but it did everything else. It did everything that was going on in art then. It had a conceptual art department and a sculpture department and a painting on a flat surface department and a systems art department and an abstract department, and had a school library. So I realized they didn't want my Chagall things that I've been doing. No one liked that. But I didn't really think I could, that painting in a live class was anything. It didn't really, I didn't excel at it straight away. The other students did. And perhaps I didn't put myself into it, partly because I was a little bit maladjusted and I didn't really know how to function with other people, but partly because I suspected that it wasn't really the thing. You know, there were all these other things that you could do. And the live class, it didn't really look like art. It looked like a thing unto itself. And I drifted and I started in a morbid sort of way, obsessively finding out about what was going on in art in 1974. So it was the end of pop art, and it was political art and conceptual art, photography art, various sort of pluralisms. There was a lot of polemics in the British art world in those days about should you be political or should you be aesthetic or should you combine the two? Should you reject modernism? Was modernism over? Should you reject American art? Was American art imperialist? And now I know all those arguments and I can very glibly trot them out. But then it was an obscure landscape that I was exploring and finding out on my own. And I thought, well, that's where I should be, there in that world, not in this world of the life class and all these students doing smudgy versions of Daubing or something.
And the kind of the systems course or the sculpture course didn't engage with that world. Were
To
they?
some extent, it did actually. The people on the sculpture course were doing post-minimalism. They were doing things like Eva Hess, you know, which was too sophisticated for me. I couldn't really understand it. But on the painting on a flat surface, I was doing things that I thought were current. I thought maybe, you know, maybe Kittai was a big example, and Jasper Johns was an obsession with me for a while. I suppose there were things where it was a popular, attractive kind of art, but that was fragmented and a little bit abstract. So it was a version of the modern and the new that I could apply the talents that I had that were given to me as a child, that I was born with, that I could apply as my wild card. You know, I could do something in the art world, in this weird, obscure art world of ideas, but I had a sort of talent for drawing an eye that looked like an eye, or a face or a figure that was convincing. I could mix that in, and so that's what I did. You know, I did all right. I had put up my final year show. People liked it. It was impressive. You know, but then nothing happened immediately. You know, wasn't immediately taken up by the Royal College, which is where everyone used to go if you were good. And so I was adrift, and I was incredibly depressed. I thought, oh my God, you know, I spent 4 years like changing my whole mind. And now I'm just like anybody else in the fucking world, you know, with no money and no prospects and nothing. And it doesn't matter about this Kittai guy. No one's heard of him. And I was really like, for a few months, I was very, very depressed and giddy with worry. And I gradually drifted by chance circumstances into the orbit of an art magazine called Art Scribe. And I started writing reviews for it, you know, which was a peculiar thing for an art student, someone who's just left art school, to do. Because for one thing, I'd never thought of art critics as anything but losers. You know, artists were the heroes. But I wanted to show off somehow. I thought maybe, you know, I was lost and adrift. I thought that's some kind of control, and I'd write witty reviews, you know, and they accepted them. And I hung around the office of that art magazine, and I started doing everything involved in running a magazine. I got ads for the magazine, I office managed the magazine, I did the subscriptions, and I subbed articles and wrote the headlines for articles, and I made articles more punchy, you know, and sped them up where they were a bit slow. And then after a few years, I became the editor of it, and then it was my magazine, and I shaped it to reflect what I thought was what trendy art was, you know. In by then it was the early 80s.
Matt, just step back a little bit then. How exactly did that happen? Because you know, it's not easy to suddenly have an entry into writing for a magazine. So you were at art school, you finished art school,